Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I am drinking my coffee today out of my special little Egypt mug. Hint, hint as to what's coming.
Egypt is like probably my favorite place on the planet right now. I've been there twice. It draws me there. I know I will be back. Plans in the works here, but where in the world pulls you, Graciela? Where do you want to go?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think at this point, probably everyone listening knows that, they're going to probably pull together a GoFundMe to get me to Paris. Paris has been on my list since I was like 15 years old. I had a French teacher who was just absolutely fabulous. And funny thing is, she was American teaching French. But she would tell us, there are children in France, tiny little children pronouncing their words perfectly. Certainly you could do it too, So it motivated us to do better because tiny little children had the perfect accent aigus, and things like that. So Paris has been on the list. Honestly, it's not like I don't even have the money. It's just like the mindset, right? Of like, okay, I got to just put it on the calendar. I got to do it. Bucket list, That's probably my number one. But yeah, I've got a million places I'd love to go. I'd love to tour more of Europe. I don't know if you know this, but I almost joined the Peace Corps. I had done my interview and I was ready to go, and I was going to go to the Nepal, Tibet, China, Asia area. So that's on the list.
That would have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one other place that is really, really calling me that I have not been yet is Machu Picchu.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure one day I will get there, maybe with the help of our guest's spouse.
Oh.
That's his specialty. And
I loved going with guides, though. I love that idea, like when you kind of do your research in advance and you know who you're going to meet and have the insider view. Like, to me, that's the way to go,
They're absolutely,
but let's face it, you're there for a limited amount of time. If you're moving there, great, but chances are you got to come back in at least a couple weeks. Why not
having that inside connection and getting to experience it a little bit more from a local perspective is just makes the experience way more special than going and doing it as the tourist and just hitting all the regular spots. So definitely.
I heard the other day, I'm not a tourist, I'm a traveler. And I love that because a traveler is someone who immerses themselves in the culture, who really looks behind the shiny touristy traps, who respects the customs and cultures, right? When in Rome, like, I think that's really cool. I would like to be a traveler, not a tourist.
Absolutely. You got anything else, or should we bring on our guest?
Let's bring on our guest. I want to give her all the time possible. This is going to be amazing.
Welcome to the show, Mary.
Welcome.
Welcome. It's good to see you both. And welcome. I'm welcoming myself because I'm not seeing anything on my screen. Am I supposed to do anything special?
Well, we see you.
Okay. Now I went into the void there for a minute. So yeah, now I can see you guys, and hi to everyone out there. And it's just so big an honor to be back with you, Julietta.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on as a repeat guest. That doesn't happen very often. And I very, very special.
I love everything you have on and behind you. How beautiful. If you guys are listening on a podcast, make sure to hop over to YouTube for a hot second and just check out this visual.
Well, it's kind of a muggy Monday morning in South Florida. So, I just a little bit of pop of color sometimes, brightens the day. Plus, this is my live-in temple. It's like most people have an apartment. I have a live-in temple, but it kind of goes with the territory.
Yes, yes. Well, we know who you are, but probably not everybody listening knows who you are. So if you could take a minute to introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. my name is Mary Lomando, and I've been traveling. I've been a traveler probably for almost 40 years now. And one of the things that I love best about going to sacred sites, which is pretty much the traveling that I'm doing now over the past 25 years, is that it brings out our inner best selves. So, we can be great people. We could be wonderful, happy in our everyday lives. But there's something about the energy of those sacred sites. And Julieta just mentioned Machu Picchu. It's like I always call Peru the back door to Egypt, because people who go to Peru love Egypt and vice versa. There's something so special. Egypt's pretty much like the cosmic wonderland. It's just you're so connected to the stars and cosmic energy there. And Peru's kind of, you're connected to the stars, but you're so grounded in the Mother Earth. It's just so goddessy there. So there are different ways of, working with the divine feminine energy. But again, my husband, who is a Peruvian shaman, we've been doing this together probably for about 25 years now. And it just never gets old. There's always something exciting about it. There's always something new to learn and experience. And I just love sharing that with people. So that little bit about me is kind of like what my whole adult life has been about the last 30, 40 years. But I'm an astrologer. I'm a Jungian astrologer, which means that I studied the psychology of Carl Jung, who was also an astrologer. And a lot of people don't know that about Jung. And so dealing with the astrological and the psychological principles of helping people kind of midwife, whatever it is that's inside them that they just really want to touch and nurture. I've been doing that for a really long time. It's like, I don't even want to say how long, because it sounds like Grandma Moses. But that astrology came first. And then on my very first trip to Egypt back in 1980 something, probably 88 or 89, I can't even remember anymore. Julieta knows what this feels like. It was like a major conversion experience. Like I took one look at the Sphinx and it was like, okay, this is it. I have to figure out what this is all about. What's this energy about? What's calling me? Why am I so invested in this feeling of ecstasy? No drugs, no anything, no sacred plants, just the vibration and the frequency of ancient Egypt itself. It doesn't matter what modern Egypt is like, which, modern Egypt's kind of fun. There's like great food, there's like lots of color, there's great stuff to buy, as you can see behind me. You meet great people and you make friends for life there. However, there's like a subtlety, there's this parallel reality that's Egypt, which you can find, and I've traveled to a lot of sacred sites. There's something about Egypt that's extremely, extremely special. It's a rarefied atmosphere. So yeah, if you can go with, and you don't necessarily have to go with me, but go with someone who understands the lay of that cosmic land. Because if you don't have the map, you miss it. It's like, yeah, you could see pyramids and you could see temples, and it's like going to a bad hairdresser and then going to find a good one. Because I have people who say to me, can you tell me what this picture was? I was in Egypt like 5 years ago and I don't remember anything. So, that's what I want to not have happen on my journeys. It's like we're steeped in spirituality. We're having fun. We're shopping. We're meeting people. We're just, riding camel, whatever it is you want to do there. It's like I allow people to have their own experience. So for me, that's my two passions rolled up into one, astrology and Egypt. And, obviously the connection there is, as we know, Western astrology, it all came from Egypt. So everything that we know in what we call the New Age in the West comes from ancient Egypt. It's the source. It's the alpha and omega of all of Western spiritual tradition. I don't care. It's not Eastern. It's not Vedic. It's not Tibetan or Chinese. But spiritual Western esotericism all comes from Egypt. So yeah, I'll go out on a limb and state that publicly.
When you mentioned that people say like I was there and I have this picture, but I don't even remember what this is, I can totally relate to that though, because like when you're over there, you feel like you're in a different dimension, and then you come back home and I just remember just feeling so disoriented returning back here. Like it took me a while to settle back in and acclimate, and even for me, like going back and looking at the pictures, it was just like that happened in a different dimension, and it was hard to reconnect to it in this dimension.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's more often the case than not. I mean, that's why people, go to Egypt more than once, especially, let's say, if you go on a spiritual tour, it's like, so you get that first immersion into it. You kind of grok what, the big picture's all about. And then you want to go back and you want to savor and really love what you love and really get into it. So I have people who for years just come back 2 or 3 times and they just go to Luxor with me. Like, they don't do, like, once they've done the Nile cruise and once they've had private time in the Great Pyramid and once they've done all the bells and whistles, it's like, yeah, Mary, let's just go to Luxor and let's just go hang out in the temples, which is how I learned about Egypt, because I went to school there. After my period of being a student in New York at NYU, and I got degrees and, different things, art history, psychology, English, you name it. I probably have a degree in it because I went to school pretty much all of my adult life. And then I went to Egypt and it was like, wow, how am I going to fit this into my repertoire? And what I did was I enrolled as a student to get an Egyptology degree at the American University in Cairo. And so that background helped kind of ground me in what it was that I wanted to do, which was basically just study all about Egypt. Egyptology isn't exactly archaeology, but it's about the history. And the goddesses are what drew me into the study of Egyptology. And I'll talk about that in a second. But this idea of knowing the temples and being able to sit in those temples, it's like countless hours. While everybody else is like, listening to the professor and taking notes, which I did. But then it was like everybody would go home or they'd go back to where they were staying. And I just sit in the temples till they threw me out. And that was like every day for like 3 years, 4 years. So I really got the spiritual connection on a very deep level with those temples that you can't just get. Sometimes it's silly when, people say, well, what books can I read? What can I, yes, you can watch videos, you can read books, you can do all that as prep to get there. But really, when you get there, it's just as Julietta said, you let Egypt do its work on you. All of your chakras are, if you're on a spiritual journey, usually your chakras are all kind of working with you in Egypt, because each one of them is getting like a whole new like wiring. It's like, wow, what's this? And so past life times bleed through. People remember things. They, start looking at hieroglyphs and telling me what they mean. And sometimes they're actually right without never looking at a hieroglyph before. So all kinds of psychic phenomena happen to you while you're in Egypt if you're open and your frequency matches. It's like a matching level. You can't get anything that's going to really blow your cork if your guides don't allow that. So, in all the temple work that we do, I always ask as a group, not everyone has to be conscious of this, because people are, in a new space, they're taking pictures, they're just in this wondrous land. And so we do a lot of, sacred site protection work, which is all about keeping the tenemos, the sacred space, so that when you go into a place, you're protected and you're in the group energy, which is held for you. So yeah, you're allowed to have your own experience, but there is this, like, especially with a really solid spiritual background of a group, you really have the net, the protection net around you, so you don't really get too much of an overload. Now, some people coming back, yeah, of course, it's culture shock, it's psychic shock, it's like every kind of shock you can name, including jet lag. So you do need to give your body some time to process that, and that's why I'm available to my clients pretty much 24/7. People email me, they text me, they talk to me on the phone when they come back. Because sometimes when we're moving every day in Egypt on the trip, you don't have time to really process everything you're going through, which is why I tell people bring a journal, because at least you can write down what you're, like, oh, before I go to bed, I felt this, or I had this particular vision in a particular temple. And then you just kind of write down like little note headings of what was important. And then when you come home, kind of go through that with me. Usually I do one-on-ones with people once they come home, because it's after the fact that it's most important. Going there, it's all excitement and experiential, but coming home is when you really want to ground that in and see how it worked for you personally. And in terms of the goddesses, I mean, for years I've been working with a class that I call the Ancient Egyptian Medicine Wheel, and it's the 4 goddesses. It's Isis in the north, it's Sekhmet in the east, it's Nephthys in the south, and Hathor, my particular favorite, in the west. And so it's about integrating those as archetypes. And a long time ago, it was a Jungian analyst by the name of Jean Sinead Bolin, who wrote a book about the Greek goddess archetypes, and it's called The Archetypes in Every Woman. And then she wrote one called The Archetypes in Every Man. And she did this with the Greek archetypes. And, you know, I learned about her when I was studying Jungian psychology, and then it was like that always stayed with me. And I thought, wow, what a great thing. And I used to use that a lot when I was working in astrology, using the asteroids, the Greek asteroids, and, you know, really delving into her work to kind of bring those asteroids out with people in their chart readings. Then when I went to Egypt and just, you know, this whole world of Egyptian goddess, divine feminine opened up, and how that works. It's like, yeah, as modern women, we're not going to go back and live in the temples, you know, although some of us would really like to do that. It's just not relevant, you know. So how do you make that work? Well, you know, let's say, you know, you're a struggling young mom, and you're, you know, you are raising a kid alone, and you just feel like things are overwhelming. Well, Isis can be a very strong archetype for you to work with. If you're an artist and you really love fashion and you're really into makeup and beautiful things, yeah, Hathor can be your go-to archetype, because she's the protectress of everything that's feminine and beautiful. She's the goddess of joy, love, happiness, sexuality, dance, aromatherapy, you name it, she's got it. And Sekhmet is very much the powerful healer. And her name means the powerful one. So when we're dealing with Sekhmet, we're dealing with divine feminine power that just, you know, really is very strong in its own right. And then Nephthys is the seer. She's the oracle. She's the one that guides you on the inner journeys. Let's say if you're doing something like the plant medicine, she's the one who's there to guide you through all the byways of the underworld. She's very much like the dark Madonna of ancient Egyptian lore. So we're looking at integrating 4 aspects of these goddesses in everyday life. And each woman may have a combination of all 4 that she's, you know, kind of working with. One may have a particular time and resonance in a particular point in your life, depending on where you are in your journey. And there's not only 4. I mean, I'm working on a deck of cards. I call them ancient Egyptian oracle cards. And, you know, you can go on forever. You know, I had to stop my husband because he was doing the artwork for me. And I was like, okay, let's call a halt, because we could go to like 120, 150 if we wanted to, but it has to be doable. So yeah, these archetypes are real. And that's one of the things that I love about Carl Jung, is like he brought that forefront into consciousness, because people didn't really know about archetypes. They kind of studied them, you know, in a different kind of way. Like if you were an indigenous shaman, you dressed like a jaguar or something, okay, because you were taking on the archetype. But modern people really did not understand that until Carl Jung came along and broke from Freud and said, not everything's about sex and desire. Like, yeah, that's a big part of it. But let's say you just isolate it. Like what Freud did was he isolated the second center and the third center and the first center. He didn't go to the higher chakras. And Jung was like this brilliant man and psychic as well, and just said, okay, you know what, there's more to this. But he had to have a nervous breakdown to break with Freud so that he could go on and become the channel, the healer, the person that he was, who basically, in my estimation, from a psychological standpoint, ushered in the New Age in terms of what we deem New Age psychology. So I digressed there for a minute, but we went from goddesses to Carl Jung. But in my world, it's all one.
Well, Mary, you actually, you know, as you were talking, and thank you for sharing so much of that. Like as you're talking, I'm coming up with questions in my head, and then you're just answering them. So very efficient of you. Thank you. Because I had follow-up questions, but everything I was going to ask you answered. You know, I'm curious if you're comfortable to talk about little Mary when Mary was little. How did you get to where you are? Like, not everyone is born knowing exactly what they want to do when they grow up. How did you find your passion? And, you know, when you were first exploring, did you have like limiting beliefs that you had to like let go of to kind of fully come into yourself? I mean, you're obviously so doing the perfect thing for you and your life. Like, you're obviously living in your flow. How'd you get here?
Well, yeah, that's like delving back now into the dark ages. Yeah, when I was a little kid, I mean, I grew up in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, in the coal mining community. So it's not exactly like the habitat of Hathor. It's more like the habitat of Pluto and Hades. But so I knew at a very early age that I personally did not belong there. And when I was a little kid, probably like 6 or 7 years old, because I was already in school because all the other kids thought I was nuts. I used to hide things in my backyard in the fall in little glass jars, like stones and dead bugs and stuff, and bury them. And then all winter long, they'd be under the snow, because back when I was a kid, there were snow drifts like 20 feet high and stuff in Pennsylvania. Wow. And then in the spring, I'd go back and dig those things up and pretend that I had just found them. So I think very early on, I knew that archaeology and digging things up out of the ground was part of my passion. And then I got older and decided that I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to, and then I grew up in the 60s. So it was all about music and exploring and mind expansion and all that good stuff that the 60s were known for. So knowing as a small child, and also I was a voracious reader. Like one of the good things about growing up in that environment was my mom, who, bless her heart, she's not with us anymore, and it was just Mother's Day, so I was thinking about this. My mother taught me how to read when I was probably about 3 or 4, because I was a pretty bright kid, and there wasn't a lot. It's not like today when you could put a kid in Montessori school or homeschool them or whatever. Back in the 1950s, that wasn't possible. But she did teach me how to read, and she had a whole stack of books by Pearl S. Buck. And there was another woman, I think her name was Taylor Caldwell or something like that. But they wrote all these historical fiction novels, which as an adult, I realized they were probably channeling their own past lives. But anyway, when I learned, I was probably like 7 or 8 in reading adult novels, and that was it. It was like, okay, that was it. I was going to travel and see all these places, and I never wanted to see a coal mine again that was it. And so while other kids were, dating and going to the high school prom and getting married and having kids at, very early age, I just went and got every college catalog I could get my hands on and applied to every place I could as far away as possible until I could get a scholarship to leave. So I started thinking about college probably when I was in 9th or 10th grade, which now doesn't seem a big deal in our modern day. But back in 1960, that was a big deal to think about college that early. Nobody did, especially in the town that I was from. So eventually, I knew the only way to survive and to do what I wanted to do was to get out of where I was born. And that was just an inner knowing. It was just like, this is not beautiful. This is not me. I don't belong here. And I'm getting out as soon as possible. It was like a life-saving voice inside my head. And that led me to a lot of other places, like New York City. I lived in London for a while. I lived in Vancouver. I lived in Sydney, Australia. I mean, I was able to travel and do things. So I've been very blessed with that.
That's beautiful. And kudos to your mom for opening those doors for you and giving you those keys and the support that you needed to do that. I mean, that's amazing. That's so beautiful. So inspirational.
Yes. And I think of that, because all of us, we don't have perfect, well, some people do, but I didn't have a perfect childhood at any, and my parents were just, hardworking Italian parents in this, little town in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. But my mom did want to go to college, and she didn't because she got married and had a child early. And so I think and I'm the oldest of 4 daughters. And so I think one of the things, the biggest gift, and it's funny, I was just thinking about this with Mother's Day yesterday, that she gave me was that she said, okay, she had a little library in our teeny little apartment. She said, here are all these books. She said, so just do whatever you want with them. You know, she let me draw on them. She let me, you know, practice my letters on the pages and stuff.
Wow.
And that was it. You know, that's pretty much, I think, what started me on my love for reading and traveling in a way. Because she also wanted to travel, but never really got anywhere. I think the farthest she got was Florida when I used to bring her down here for go to health spas and stuff like that.
And now you're leading the way for others to travel. I mean, how amazing is that? That's probably further than she ever even thought, you know, possible. That's really amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, and she loved. I mean, she loved the Bible stories, and she had all these books with, you know, different you know, pictures about the Holy Land and Egypt and all of that. But you know, Egypt really wasn't on my radar very when I was young. You know, I was when I was in New York at NYU, I was studying Middle Eastern art and history, and I was really obsessed with Iraq. And when the Kuwaiti War broke out, my professors, you know, who are all Iraqi specialists, it was just like everything took a nosedive. So it wasn't like, oh, because I always had this, you know, I always wanted to go to Iraq. I always wanted to go to Lebanon. I wanted to go to these places that were really like off the beaten track, but had all of these amazing antiquities that you could study. So it was kind of disappointing to me that I couldn't do that. And then I went to Egypt, I think it was probably 1987. It was right after harmonic convergence, and that was in 1987. So it's between 87 and 89 when I first did my beginning trip to Egypt. And it was part of a video shoot that was going on with a man named John Anthony West, who was doing a movie on the Sphinx. And his idea is that the Sphinx is way, way older than they say, and probably goes back to pre-Atlantean Egypt, and it was built as a marker point and so on and so forth. So it gets into a lot of esoteric Egyptology and what they call maverick archaeology. So anyway, that became my passion, and that's another reason why I decided that I had to go to school in Egypt, because I had to learn what they were teaching. In other words, I couldn't do point and counterpoint as a spiritual person if I didn't know what the ground rules were. So for me, it was like a necessity. And I remember one of my professors at the American University, everybody's into mummies, and they still are. I mean, Egypt, of course, it's, you know, mummies, it's all about mummies. And they said, well, what are you writing your thesis on? And I said, well, I'm writing it on the divine feminine in ancient Egypt and the goddesses. And the professor looked at me, and it was a woman, and she's like, what? Why are you wasting your time on that? She's like, nobody wants to know. So this was back in 1991. Wow. And I thought, well, I want to know. So it's, you know, and that's why I'm here. I'm paying to go to school. So I'm going to, you know, study what I want to study. So I didn't go the mummy route. I'd probably be making a lot more money if I did. For me, it was just about, okay, that's, what do I love? Why am I here? And, you know, it just developed that way.
And so I'm going to share with our audience on our first trip that I went with you, Mary. After we went to Philae Temple, you know, when we were there, every night before I would go to bed, I would sit and meditate and call in my spirit guides and ask for any information that I needed to know, you know, from Egypt. And that night when I sat in my bed, Isis came and said to me that it's time for the sacred feminine to awaken, and that it's on us to change the world right now, because it's so caught up in the toxic masculinity. And because the men are so caught up in it, and not every man, but just the vast majority of them are so, like, they can't get out of it. And the way for us to bring them out is for us to, as women, to heal ourselves and connect to our sacred feminine. And because, like, even that feminist movement was really women stepping into the masculine energy and trying to forcefully take their power. And that's not feminine. And so connecting to the sacred feminine to heal humanity right now. And so I think you doing that as your thesis back then was like the start of bringing that goddess sacred feminine energy to the planet.
Yeah, and I think a big key is it's like, okay, follow your bliss. That's what I mean, I left my career at that point when I was working in the music business in New York City. And I left that to go to Egypt, which, you know, people thought I was crazy to begin with, because like nobody leaves a nice job in the music business to go live in a foreign country during the Gulf War. So it was kind of interesting, you know, but my timing's always been my own. And that feeling of doing that, it wasn't like I was out to save the world, because, you know, the term divine feminine consciousness wasn't even in the vernacular yet. I mean, I'm pretty much almost a generation ahead of you guys, because I was born in the 50s. So it's like, okay, there had to be path showers. There had to be people who went in and just kind of did the groundwork. And I guess I was, you know, chose that kind of path as being the oldest of 4 sisters. I was always the one who was doing stuff first. You know, I got the nice clothes first and they got the hand-me-downs, but I'm the one that had to like go out and do, you know, push forward and argue and get, you know, it was in my nature to be that way. And so knowing that later, much, much later, because I went to Egypt when I was in my mid 30s, it wasn't until probably I was in my mid 40s that it all came together. And I said, oh, okay, you know, this is about showing women the goddess energy and doing it in Egypt, because that's where it came, you know, that's the birthing place. And a lot of times when we go to Dendera, which is the big Hathor temple in around Luxor, we're in the birthing house, and it's called the New Year Chapel. And that particular energy there is all about birthing your unbirthed creations. So it's like a constant renewal. Every temple in Egypt is always about renewal. There's something about the idea of resurrection and ascension that we take for granted now, especially since the dawn of Christianity. The idea of resurrection is in like popular vernacular. Now, you know, ascension is in popular vernacular. Back in the day, the ancient Egyptians worked on this idea of it's where the idea of alchemy comes from. Like you're this base human of instinct and desire. It's kind of like what Freud said. And then you rise, you know, you work through that. The initiatic process in Egypt is working through your chakras. So that's what I'm saying. Like this is something that nowadays we all work with and we all understand that. But back in the ancient times in Egypt, it was, you had to be very aware. It's almost like you had to be born into a particular strata of society to partake of that very, very esoteric information. And how that came down to the people was the idea of the afterlife and mummies and keeping your statues, you know, mummifying your little dog and cat and keeping it in your home and all that. So we get these overlays in ancient Egypt, but the idea of Egypt, the particular most hidden esoteric version of that multi-layered religion there, is that you start from scratch as a human and you build up to semi-divinity. And they gave you a plan for that and a manual for it. And it's called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So there's only one other culture that, in my estimation, comes close to that. And that's the Tibetans, because they have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is pretty much the same thing. So there was a realm of humankind going way, way back before what we know as recorded history that knew stuff. And where that stuff came from, well, you know, that's anybody's guess. Who built the pyramids? Well, you know, you can pick a theory, you know, but they're there and they're still there. So you can choose to believe whatever you want about how they got there, but they're not going anywhere. And, you know, as long as humanity needs to be reminded that that's the point, that we go from something very, very, very small and, you know, let's say non-evolved, like a caterpillar in a cocoon, and then we evolve into something that's beautiful and bright and semi-divine. So that's pretty much all of the Egyptian theology in a nutshell. You know, so when we go there, and so we're bringing our spin to it, which is like, yeah, let's work with the feminine energy, because the planet is rising, and so are we. And so Mother Earth has always been there. She's always been the divine feminine. And so it's almost like we're refining and refining something that's already been here forever. We had cultures that worshipped the goddess and were matriarchal cultures and really respected the divine feminine. Kind of got lost, past a couple thousand years, but we're moving back into that. And it's not just divine feminine, it's also divine masculine. So when we get that inner balance inside ourselves, then we can work with it on the outer level as well. Everything now is all about projection. All this stuff with AI and virtual reality and all that, we've created that. We humans created that in our minds, which means we can outpicture anything and call it reality. That's a real good nugget to hold for the age of Aquarius. If you can picture it in your mind, it's a reality. And so we're going to see that. People say, oh, watch, because AI is just, you're going to get fooled by AI. Well, I can't get fooled by anything because I know what, my brain tells me what's real and I trust that. My intuition tells me what's real and I trust that. And that's going to be the road that we're all going to follow. That's the evolvement of the human condition over the next 20 to 30 years, all the while Pluto's in Aquarius, is to redefine your own sense of what's the truth and follow your intuition and really listen to your inner guidance, because there's going to be stuff coming at you from all different directions. If you don't have a nice filtering system, hopefully based in a spiritual philosophy that's meaningful and loving and compassionate, then you might be feeling a bit strange over the next couple of years.
We're getting close to needing to wrap up, but there's a blue lotus sitting over your shoulder and it keeps calling to me. And I'm wondering if you want to say anything about the blue lotus.
Sure.
Now that's the same question.
That's a photograph actually from the lotus that we're raising in Luxor, at my house in Luxor, which is called the Blue Lotus House. And we've been raising the indigenous blue lotus. Now there's blue lotus that grow in Thailand, they grow in the Far East, they grow all over. But the indigenous blue lotus, since Roman times, they only grow south of the Egyptian Nile. So they grow in Sudan and Eritrea, real lower parts of the Nile. And so these flowers were brought up from a man who had them in Eritrea somewhere back around 2006. He gave them to my friend, she's the guardian of the house, and said, okay, these flowers, these sacred flowers of Egypt belong back in Egypt. So I'm giving them to you. Just raise them, do what you want with them. And then he flew off and, never heard from him again. So these lotus are the sacred flower you see them all over the tombs of Egypt. It's like the idea is, and even in India, that's why they're indigenous to the Far East as well. Different types of lotus were grown in Persia, the Far East, India, China has a lot of pink and blue lotus. So these ones look a little different than those, but these ones carry a very interesting frequency because it's almost like they were rebirthed in the New Age, up to where they grew originally. And the land that my house is on is adjacent to the temples of 18th dynasty, Queen Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III. And so originally these lotuses were grown everywhere in Egypt. They were in the Nile, they were in all the temples. And so it was just, the house was built, I built the house probably in 1992. And the lotus didn't arrive until 2006. So it was a long time coming for frequency to kind of match, for those flowers to come back. And my project since then, the Blue Lotus Project, is about conserving these flowers because there's not that many of them. We only have 2 ponds. But someday, perhaps the Egyptian establishment will be open to putting them back into the temples, which at this point, they don't really care. So, but we're keeping them alive. And certain people, Juliet is one of them, when they come to Egypt, they are, kind of invited by the Blue Lotus to come and hang out, and to partake of that energy, which is all about 7th chakra. It's all about opening up your higher centers. And it's all about love. And sometimes I'll sit with them, for days when I'm there by myself. And, I hear them sing. They have messages. They're just kind of, each one of them has its own little personality. So I'm kind of like the flower whisperer over there. Yeah. But when these, that photograph was gifted to me by a woman who visited. She didn't stay at the house. She just came for an afternoon. And she's a beautiful photographer, and she took some of these photos and gave them to me. And it's like everyone I show these photos to, it's like they're mesmerized. I mean, there's something about the Blue Lotus. It's very, very mesmerizing.
I'm thinking this needs to be a giant mural, a giant something much, much larger, because look how striking it is just as is. I can only imagine really having it very large.
Right. Well, your artist eye picks up on that.
Well, and your artist eye, you, like I said, you've curated a beautiful background. You might win the award for the most beautiful background we've ever had on the show.
Dropping in Egypt over the years, right?
You've curated such a magical life for yourself, and you're clearly in tune with so much. And I feel like we could talk to you for probably 7 more hours nonstop. So like Julietta said, I know we're getting towards the end. I just want to ask you one more question, a little bit open-ended. So, tread lightly, right? But what is the one parting thought you would like everyone to know? We've talked so much a little bit about everything. If folks just take away one important gift, what would that be?
Well, it's kind of like what I think I've said it a few thoughts back. It's like you really have to, number one, know yourself. Like the Greeks said, know thyself. That's the message of the Sphinx. So it's like, okay, you really want to understand your own self and not project yourself out on everybody else and blame everybody else. And then, listen to your intuition. And this sounds so trite, but like follow what you love. You might not be able to make money at first doing what you love, but maybe it's a hobby, or maybe it's something like, let's say, on the bucket list of travel, or taking a class, or writing poetry, or whatever it is. If it makes your heart feel good, then we have to give more space to that, because that's the big survival issue now. It's like to really feel rooted and planted and part of the universe and the earth that you live in. If you're, if you're not following your own truth, it's really easy to be swayed by other people and to listen to everything else that's coming down the pike. So again, as trite as it sounds, as Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. And, some people, because I deal with astrology clients all the time, and it's like, they don't even know what their bliss is. Well, if you don't know that, then, okay, you want to like go have a reading with somebody. You want to go get some sort of counseling or therapy session, because things are just covered over. It's like, it's there. You just need to part the weeds a little bit to see what's, under the underbrush. And then you kind of work with that. It's like you discover the, gold in the midst of all that coal. There's no accident that I was born in the middle of the coal fields. It's like, you really have to work hard sometimes to get to that gold. And, and if anybody really wants to have the fast track, like the high road to frequency, come to Egypt with me. I'm doing another trip in November. So, all of that's available to you. And again, it's the timing and knowing that it's the right, time for you in your life and how it all works. But believe me, I never have to hard sell Egypt for people. It's like, they know when it's time to go. Like your guides will work with you and say, you know what, I've heard it over and over again, Mary, I've been having dreams. Mary, I need to go. I've been seeing Sekhmet come to me. I see Isis on my, a lot of interesting things happen when people are getting ready to take one of those big life-changing trips.
And for our audience, check the show notes if Egypt's calling you, or if you need a reading to help know yourself better. You can find all the ways to contact Mary in the show notes. And I highly recommend reaching out, because it will be life-changing for sure. So with that, I think that's a wrap. That was a lot for our audience. And we really appreciate you coming on again, Mary, and sharing all of that amazing wisdom with us.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. And I love speaking to both of you. And again, I wish we could do this like 3 or 4 more hours. Maybe we will someday, just over coffee or something.
Absolutely.
Off the record. Thank you all.
All right. Have a magical day.